You've asked your question. The co-leader of the Social Democrats, Deputy Shortall, please.
Thank you. Taoiseach, yesterday you spoke about the importance of honesty, but don't you need to be honest with the people about your climate action plan? Clearly that plan is failing, and spectacularly so, it has to be said. According to the EPA, even if every planned measure in the plan was implemented in full, our emissions would only be reduced by 28%. The legally binding target is 51%. With just 8 years to go to reach this target, our emissions are going up, not down. Last year, our emissions increased by 6%. Taoiseach, you say all the right things when it comes to the climate crisis, that climate change is the single greatest threat facing humanity, and that the time to act is now. And we all agree with that. But climate rhetoric is not climate action. There is a plan, but little or no implementation. Even if there were, the planned measures are not sufficient to allow us to reach our targets. Taoiseach, it's like you're setting us up to fail. And that failure will not just be felt by the current generation, but by future generations also. If our emissions keep rising over the course of your government, we will have lost the opportunity to reach our climate targets by 2030. There would simply be too much ground to make up and not enough time. Of course, there are changes that we all must make, but there are certain changes that can only be made by your government, Taoiseach. The public cannot put restrictions on the development of data centres, for example, which now use more electricity than all of the rural homes in this country, or ensure a coherent planning and regulatory system is in place to develop our offshore wind potential, or incentivise farmers to diversify, or introduce a retrofitting scheme that people can actually afford. That, Taoiseach, is your job. The bold, big measures that are needed, massive public infrastructure, projects like the metro to get people out of their cars are simply not happening quickly enough. Meeting our climate targets will not be easy, we all know that, and nobody should pretend that they will be. But we need a fighting chance, and we're not getting it under your government, Taoiseach. So I'm asking you, first of all, what immediate changes are you going to make in response to the EPA report? Secondly, are you going to make changes to the retrofit scheme to make it more affordable for ordinary people? And thirdly, when do you expect to see our emissions actually reduce?
Thank you, Shortall. Taoiseach.
I would disagree with the Deputy in respect of your analysis of the government's commitment to climate change. This government has introduced some of the most significant climate change legislation in an unprecedented way in terms of the targets we have set and creating legal obligations on this government and indeed future governments, which is the first requirement. We've introduced a carbon tax, for example, which gives resources for the future, both now and for the future, to deal with fuel poverty, to deal with retrofitting, to give us the funding to enable retrofitting to happen. And that's provided for in legislation. And also, in terms of the Climate Action Plan and its publication, it will be very challenging. And that's why we need everybody in the House on board in respect of the actions that have to be taken. And that includes, by the way, and I don't know whether you continue to support the increases in carbon tax, because I'm not clear how in terms of the turf issue recently, you seem to box in different directions and articulate against the government in that. But in my view, what is the plan that we've put forward is transformative. And it details what we must do to meet this challenge in terms of reducing overall greenhouse gas emissions by 51% by 2030. And implementation is key. I agree with the EPA in relation to that. And the urgent implementation of climate plans and policies is absolutely key to this. And the sectoral emissions ceilings will be brought by Minister Ryan before Cabinet shortly. And without question, all sectors will have to play its role. and significant progress is being made across the board. And what we are doing now will set the foundations for transformative change in respect to our climate performance as a country and in terms of the reducing of emissions. Because the legislation we've passed, to the opposition of quite a number in the House, and the measures we have taken, give us a foundation and a base. But each sector of the economy and society will have to step up in terms of its performance and in terms of getting emissions reduced. And that is the clear commitment of government in terms of behavioural change that we are bringing about through a range of instruments at our disposal: taxation instruments, incentives, various initiatives that we've taken in agriculture and we've taken in enterprise, and also in respect of the energy efficiency side. I mean, the retrofitting grants are the most extensive yet announced, and the allocation of resources has been quite significant. And more importantly, we've given the industry in that area a clear timeline to the end of the decade by virtue of the carbon tax. We've given them a clear indication that they can be certain about that revenue stream to enable us to retrofit thousands and thousands and thousands of houses.
Deputy Shortall.
Taoiseach, you can't argue with the figures. The emissions are going up, not down. And they've increased by 6% in the last year. So it's not working. You need to do an awful lot more. And, just today the EPA said a step up in both the implementation of actions already set out in plans and policies and the identification of new measures is needed. Now, Taoiseach, what are those new measures? Can you tell us what they are? And secondly, you've been promising the sectoral plans for a long time now. When exactly are we going to see them?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Very shortly, I think the Minister will be bringing it before Cabinet, and then we'll bring it to the Dáil in terms of he's in, the timeline he has set, he is adhering to. And there are a whole range of targets. There are a whole range of targets in terms of the Climate Action Plan across the board, in terms of EVs, in terms of the EV vehicles and so on like that, in terms of retrofitting, in terms of riparian schemes, in terms of agriculture, which we've developed and will be announced by Minister Hackett shortly, in respect of the growing of trees adjacent to waterways and rivers and so on. A lot of progress has been made, and a lot of hard work has gone into this in terms of the departmental department by department, engaging with Minister Ryan's department in respect of the ceilings that each sector will have to achieve. And as I said shortly, when we bring it before government, we'll bring it before.
Saying that for a long time.
No, I haven't been saying it for a long time. The Minister has been very clear in outlining the various steps that have to be taken from the publication of the plan.
Time is up now,
onwards,
Taoiseach. Thank you.